is it, first of all, what does this mean, and what does it offer that's different than just another listing of existing collaborative efforts? So that's what we're going to try to spend a few minutes kind of looking into. And I like to begin, rather than the model itself, is just where it fits in the kind of scheme of problem-solving strategies. So you might be familiar with these kinds of models. People for years have been studying problem types. What's the best way to attack certain types of problems? And a common framework is these kind of simple, complicated, and complex problems. So a simple problem is one where we're pretty sure what the problem is, and we're pretty sure what the solution is. So you do not need a collective impact initiative if all of your problems are like broken arms. It is a very simple strategy. It's a matter of just kind of executing on a best practice. You put a cast on the arm, you set the bone, and you let it heal. It doesn't take a lot of complicated effort to kind of get a bunch of different people in the room to figure out different ways to work together. It's pretty much executing on a best strategy. If our problems in our communities were like that, we wouldn't need to talk about collective impact. Even one notch up, if we were facing problems that are complicated, they're fuzzy, they're uncertain, it requires a lot of expertise, but pretty much when you get enough experts in the room and they look at the research, they'll figure out how to treat it. And in the kind of world of health, that would be treating cardiac problems. There might be kind of various issues. It might be slightly dietary, it might be slightly biological, it might be, surgery might be needed, but we're gonna probably figure it out with enough research and enough kind of testing of it. The problems that we're talking about are the third type. They are complex. That's different than a simple problem where there's no one best practice. That's different than a complicated problem where if we just studied it long enough, we'd get the right solution. A complex problem is an iterative puzzle. It means that when you try to solve it, you often make it worse by your first efforts. The very interaction effects between government programs have actually sometimes exacerbated things like poverty. They don't always kind of help solve them. So complex problems are ones that do not allow for the simple, quick, robust solutions that many other problems that we face are. They require some way to bring the people into the room who are part of that system and begin to align efforts over time and stay at it so that our results don't actually create worse problems for ourselves. So when we enter this discussion of collective impact, it's building on 20 and 30 years worth of research at attempts at collaborative problem solving and trying to figure out what would be different if we worked in different ways. And that's the kind of backdrop that this conversation starts in. And the folks, how many folks have read some of the articles out of the FSG group, just so I see a show of hands? They're a group out of, I think their actual headquarters is in Boston, but they've been around for 20 or 30 years, kind of consultants in the field, finally synthesized this work in, as I said, in January 2011, and have since written a number of other articles. I'll be drawing a lot on their material, and there's a bibliography that when we send you this PowerPoint, you'll have access to a bunch of good articles if you want to read further. But they give some kind of founding terminology that I think is useful for us. Collective impact is really a commitment of a group of important actors from diverse background sectors, so again, not single solution strategies, multi-sector backgrounds, to form a common agenda for solving specific complex social problems at scale. You guys have signed up for that journey if you're taking on things like reducing poverty. That's by definition the space we're in. Second, no single organization could really create this kind of change. If it was simple, if it was something someone could do, we would have already done it. It takes all of us working on it. And it addresses a wide variety of issues from education, healthcare, to homelessness, or in your case, poverty. So it's not just let's go after one thing together. There's going to be multiple dimensions of the work we're doing together. And one of the best ways to kind of visualize this is I think this is the state of affairs in just about every community across the country. Well-intentioned folks heading off in different directions, making a difference on things they're passionate about or committed to, but really making, at best, isolated impact. And I think many of us have probably felt this is the story of our careers, the feeling that you're working on one thing, sometimes in opposite directions with those around us. If we're lucky, we've put together coalitions, we've gotten together initiatives that at least try to say, let's all row in the same direction. And I think this is the promise that I think collective impact offers, is the difference between simply agreeing on shared goals, what we think we want to do, and having a more robust way of actually seeing if we're adding to each other's efforts, if we're really adding up to something more. Now, I'll speak passionately about collective impact. I too share the concern that the term itself might be another fad. We may move on to something. But I think what's powerful about the concept, whatever we might name it, is this additive factor. And as a former teacher, when I used to think about working in schools, one of the most challenging things was getting the second grade team to really talk to the fifth grade team, so that by the time the fifth grade team had that child in their classroom, they had benefited from every previous support for that child. Those of us providing kind of immediate care, helping families out of crisis, knowing that when you pass that family off to somebody that's going to help them find more stable housing or find a job, you just hope and pray that the work you put in will be built on. This moves from hoping and praying to much more intentional strategies of really agreeing on a collective approach, similar goals, and measurement. So hopefully, if this is your first introduction to collective impact, that visual will stand in your mind as first and foremost moving from isolated efforts that dissipate our energy over time to aligned efforts and on to a much more collective impact. So they talk about 5 conditions, our friends at FSG, and we're going to add a 6th today, so it's kind of a bonus. It's the same price as the 5, but you get one more. And that comes out of our own experience at Civic Canopy, but I think nationally people realizing there was a missing dimension, so that'll be your special extra ingredient number 6. The first 5, which are the classic ones, we're talking about backbone support, having a common agenda, working with a shared measurement system, that you work on mutually reinforcing activities, and that you engage in continuous communication. What was missing in those first 5, which is a critical one, which seems to be a passion for this community, is really the grassroots authentic engagement of the folks you're trying to either serve or fix, depending upon how we often phrase our language and services. So that's the bonus one, is what does it really mean to authentically engage with full community members? Well, let's take them one at a time. And again, you'll have access to this PowerPoint, so you can just kind of think about it. So backbone support is one of the most novel contributions in the concept when it came out. For years, people had been trying to kind of just shoestring their way through collaboratives. Everybody, on top of what they were already doing, hosting that extra meeting of collaboration, no one really had time for it. Nobody wanted to take the notes home. Nobody wanted to get the next meeting out there. So the backbone support is an entity or entities, so it's not just a single one. It's a role or a function that is different than the delivery of the actual work in the field. It's a core function, much like a facilitator in a conversation. A backbone entity or entities provide that support and infrastructure for the collaborative. Ongoing support, it could be played by a number of roles. Nonprofits, foundations, government agencies, United Ways around the country are doing this with expertise. But it's someone who's willing to stand in the gap, provide that neutral kind of context to move it forward. Now, backbones are not, and this is where things can sometimes go awry, the ones setting the agenda, the ones only leading the charge. They are not the solution drivers promoting a program that they have of their own and hoping everyone else will follow in suit. They don't necessarily receive all the funding, which can be one of the things that erodes the trust in a collaborative. They're not self-appointed. You don't get just to call yourself a backbone and expect everybody to kind of circle up around you. It's really got to win over the trust and the respect of the collaboration itself. And it isn't simply just a new way of rearranging the deck chairs to do what you're already doing and just give a new name to it. It really serves a set of vital functions: neutral convening, project management, working with the data to make sure it's in people's hands, removing the roadblocks so those that are coming to the table have an easier chance at it. Very specific things. And again, this is one of the most important contributions that makes it separate from many collaborations as they often exist in communities. Second is setting this common agenda. Again, it's not enough to say we're all working on the same issue. Do we really have the same agenda? Do we really see ourselves as kind of in the same boat? I was talking to Bev Thurber. I'm just about finishing this awesome book called Boys in the Boat. Highly recommended if you haven't seen it. There's a big difference between just happening to be rowing in the same boat in the same direction and really pulling in a way that's got a shared agenda. We want to do this thing together. We're in sync with each other. It's a joint approach. It's a similar vision. There's agreed upon actions. Use an example in the Early Childhood Colorado Partnership. There's literally an Early Childhood Colorado framework that's a single page that everybody can say, here's where I fit, here's where we're all going together. It provides an enormous source of support for that group. That's a key distinction, having a common agenda. Third, and this one's often the one that's missing in groups that try to become a collective impact initiative, it's really taking shared measurement systems seriously. And so that means collecting similar data and measuring similar results by the same yardstick. Which can be terrifying, that sense of accountability that all of us are kind of measuring our efforts by a similar standard. I think for years it's been easier to kind of hide behind the fact that this work is so hard, no one would really ever know if we're making progress anyway, so we can just kind of keep working hard on it. It means putting ourselves out there and saying, I'm willing to acknowledge That the work I do is not simply because I'm passionate about it. It has to be making a difference that matters to the community. And so as someone I think said, this question of duplication oftentimes gets resolved in a sense of outcome measurements. Are we making the difference that we said we're here to do and that we're receiving funding to do? And how would we know? It shares accountability. An example in Powers County, a group that we're working with down there, they all came to the same table and had to really get serious about how they were broadly working on health measures, but at the end of the day, which ones would they actually be held accountable to? It forced some tough conversations, but it allowed them to work together much more effectively to hold themselves accountable to a similar measure. Fortunately, that also attracted more funders who were more willing to say, if you guys are in and you're committing to those same outcome measures, we'd be more willing to commit to supporting your efforts. Fourth, continuous communication. I hardly even need to go over this slide because I think everybody knows this is one of the things that makes collaboration so tricky. Who's doing what? Is it making a difference? It serves not only an informational purpose, but almost a motivational purpose to know that folks on your same team are moving the ball down the field farther and you didn't even have to go to that meeting. That you've been winning and now you don't need to do the thing that someone just took on, or someone has a new piece of information to share for the whole. Complicated slide, but one worth pausing on. This idea of mutually reinforcing activities. This is a central one in collective impact. So what this is meant to depict is kind of the overall structure. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail after the break. But on the left-hand side is kind of an organizing structure for the network. You have kind of a steering committee that kind of represents the overall interests of that network. You have this backbone support. But in the kind of field over here, it begins with folks just as they appear in the community, us as individuals or as individual organizations. You kind of see that next level up. Folks choose to become partners. They're dedicated. Their colors there represent, here's my agenda, here's where I'm heading, here's what I'm working on. So you bring your individual agendas to the collective impact table. But as we realign those agendas and form kind of dedicated working groups, this balance between the work I'm committed to in my day job and what this collaborative is about start to align, and we begin to kind of commit our efforts in more strategic ways that reinforce each other. And just as I said, it's one thing in a school for the teachers to kind of be working in isolation on their individual curricula. It's a very different thing when the second graders and the third grade team are really advancing each other's efforts down the field. And there has to be this kind of continuous communication, this sense of planning and strategizing that's flowing through the whole network. But really, how do we do more than just keep working harder and harder at things that don't seem to make a difference? And how do we align our efforts so that we're benefiting from each other's efforts? So mutually reinforcing activities is, again, a distinguishing feature of collective impact initiatives. The last one, just to move through quickly, is a series of transitions that come with engagement. Much of the model of typical community engagement starts like this. There's some central group that has a great idea of how they want to make the community better. They think, we need to reach out to those people that aren't a part of our group. And those people usually often represent people that are, have less income than them, have darker skin than them, and who come to fewer meetings than them. And so that's the kind of paradigm that starts, is how do we reach out to those disengaged people from our central position? In authentic engagement, rather than, you can imagine what it feels like to be that person being reached out to. You've already missed part of the game. Oftentimes it's about you for some outcome that you didn't necessarily help shape. In an authentic engagement mindset, it starts with the paradigm that we're all embedded in networks. There's no one who's out there unengaged. It's just that we haven't yet connected our networks. We haven't figured out how to speak each other's language and to build things together. And so you start to see the world as a series of network development. How do we tap into networks of folks that we're not connected with yet? Brings in much greater equality and parity. And the conversations start off as equals and co-conveners and co-constructors rather than a central group going out to engage or fix or cure other folks. So it's something I think we have to be mindful of in the helping industries that are predicated on service delivery. How do we make sure that our style and techniques of engagement really build a much more equal foundation and value that? So that was your sixth bonus category. Two more quick ideas. So there's also, and this is kind of a late arrival in the collective impact literature, a series of mindset shifts that have to work through to go along with this. You can't just say, great, today we're doing collective impact work. There's this concept of let's go get other people's buy-in, which is really kind of a sales premise. We've got a good product, let's go sell it to people. How do we have the entire community begin to own things so that it isn't just a core group of motivated people selling things to others? It's what would someone want to own? What would someone really want to buy into to the point of taking action on their own behalf? So it assumes a distribution of power that is often not a part of previous efforts like collaboration. Again, it goes from we need more individual programs to how do we change a system so that we're not always having to work downstream to fix the brokenness that was left by that? How do we really re-engineer things like job structures, things like the way people, affordable housing structures, the social determinants of health, much more systemic, higher up the chain of influence. It moves from content to a greater awareness of context. So rather than this being an issue about health, we're thinking more and more about where are people engaging in health? Where does health actually intersect with their lives? What are the conditions people need? So it has a lot to do with understanding the folks that we're not yet in connection with. What do they care about? Where are they? Who are they? And what matters to them? And so content expertise is no longer as significant as that expertise of understanding the way things are embedded in our communities. And then last, and this doesn't seem to be a particular issue in your community. I feel like the vibes I get every time I'm here are one of shared credit. But we have to go from how can I get that picture in my own newsletter so I can show that I'm making the difference to a much more distributed and shared sense of leadership in the community. And I think this is, again, a differentiating factor. We noticed in Colorado 9 to 25, which is a youth-led statewide collective impact initiative, the first slides had everybody's logos on them. Slides today are all just Colorado 9 to 25. Nobody seemed to need that over time. And that was an adjustment and a shift of how do we move from a paradigm of credit to a paradigm of collective impact. And that's, again, it's something that I think you guys have a great head start on.